A basic introduction to watercolor and gouache paints. These are the Koh-i-Noor watercolor sets. They are stackable and come in a great range of colors, perfect for beginners to start with. I use a range of sizes from 3, 2, 1, 0 and 00, all Winsor & Newton round Cotman brushes. I use tissues to dry the paintbrushes on. I have a dropper. It's helpful to use and can be easier to control how much water goes onto the paint. I prefer adding water by my paintbrush. Add a small drop of water to activate the paint. Mix the water around so the paint activates and becomes nice and pigmented. I clean my brush in water and lightly dab it sideways on the tissue, preventing damage to the bristles. This is great practice to become familiar with your paints. All watercolor paints will be different, so always test the colors to get a good feel. By adding more water to the paint, the color will be less pigmented and become more of a light wash. Some paints may require more water being added. Other paints may be stronger in pigment and require less water to activate. This is a great exercise to try on all watercolors to become familiar with the paint pigments and consistency. Start with a heavy pigment and then slowly add water to blend the color out. You may notice that some colors may be more pigmented and stronger than others. I find in this set, the blues, greens and pinks tend to be stronger than the yellow, orange and browns. This is how I add black to any of my watercolors. Black is strong and only requires a small amount to darken a color. In my gemstone rendering videos, when I say paint a light wash, this is what I mean. Keep adding water to the paint to make the colour less intense. Always test this on a scrap piece of paper. I always test my paints on a scrap piece of paper first. I cannot stress this enough. When less water is added to the paint, the colour tends to be stronger and more pigmented. This is how I mix colours together. Again, do this on a scrap piece of paper. I recommend for beginners using a palette to mix on so your paints don't dry as quick. Mixing colours on paper, the paper will absorb the water and cause the paint to dry out quickly. I use the Winsor & Newton Designer Gouache Zinc White. I like to place my Zinc White in a pot. It can be reactivated with water and also saves wasting the paint. I find I can control the wash of the paint better this way. I dab my brush into the water and start mixing it into the paint to reactivate it. This is the Zinc White Gouache. Gouache is a paint that can be reactivated with water. Zinc White has a chalky texture and is perfect for highlights and gemstones. This is the permanent white gouache. It can be tricky to use. Keep in mind that all paint consistencies will depend on the environment you are in. Weather and temperature will always drastically affect the paint. Permanent white gouache. This is an overhead shot of how I added water to create the right consistency. In summer, I always have to keep adding water to my permanent white to help keep it flowing nicely. Try adding water to make the paint a creamy consistency. If it's too watery, the paint will run everywhere and be too thin. Too thick and it'll be impossible to create nice fine lines with. This all comes with practice. It is very important to play around with this paint and find the consistency that works best for you. I find a nice creamy consistency will flow nicely. However, I must continually add water to the paint. This is how I clean my brushes to remove excess colour. Always be gentle and lightly dab the brush to prevent damage to the bristles. This is how I blend colours out using small amounts of water. I only dab the tip of the brush in the water. You will find you don't need a lot of water to blend the colour out. Behind all my paintings, there's always a scrap piece of paper that looks like this, where I've tested all the colours before applying it to my design. This is the painting. I test all colours before applying the paint to the gemstone to ensure I had the correct wash, shade, colour and tone. This is what one of my palettes looks like. I have dried gouache on it and I simply add water to reactivate the paint. I keep it stored away so it prevents dust from settling on the paint to keep it nice and fresh. Simply add small amounts of water to reactivate the paint. I have painted 2 squares of gouache and let them dry. Gouache is a very versatile paint. It can be reactivated when dry. You can apply different coats over the top to create layers. You can blend wet paint into the dry paint easier. The paint can even be watered down to a watercolor consistency. I will now add water to the paint that has dried to reactivate it. Painting over the first layer of watercolor. Always let the first layer dry fully before applying a second layer. Always test the color first on a scrap piece of paper before applying to the gemstone. This is what I mean when I say quickly clean and lightly dry your brush, then use a slightly damp brush to blend the colour out. By cleaning the brush, it removes the excess colour, making it easier to blend out smoothly. Repeating the same process for the green, some colours will be easier to blend than others. Clean my brush to remove the excess colour. Then dab the brush on the tissue to remove most of the water. The brush is slightly damp and this will help move the colour to create a nice blend. When I use permanent white, I always place a pea-sized amount on a scrap piece of paper. Using a 00 brush, slowly add small amounts of water to the paint to create that beautiful creamy texture. Make sure the watercolor layer has dried fully. It always takes myself a bit of time before I find the right consistency of paint. I am constantly adding small amounts of water as I work through all my paintings. The paint will dry out, so you will always need to add water to it. When I get it right, I can paint nice lines and the paint will flow beautifully. Here it started to get dry, so I must apply a small amount of water. I say small amount, I am only dipping the tip of my brush into the water. paint will stop flowing smoothly, and this is when you will need to add that tiny amount of water to get it flowing again. This all comes easier with practice, so keep at it. It does get easier the more you do this. I always use Zinc White as a light wash, meaning the paint is watered down. This creates highlights to the stones. Always make sure your layers are dry before applying. Notice how the Zinc White will slightly fade when it is dried. Allow all layers to dry fully. Using the light wash of colour, I can carefully paint over the previous layers like so. When I say in my videos, apply a light wash of paint, this is what I mean. Water down the paint so it becomes less pigmented. When I say quickly clean and lightly dry your brush to blend the colour out. Clean the brush in water to remove the excess paint. Lightly dab on the tissue to slightly dry the brush. The brush being slightly damp is now able to move and blend the colour out smoothly. Dabbing to blend colours. I am painting the oval 2 colours. Using the clean and slightly damp brush to lightly dab on the painting to blend the colours together. Mixing colours. We are painting such small objects and therefore we never need a large amount of paint. Always start with small amounts to prevent wastage. I keep adding paint and water until I get the right shade. Adding the light wash of green over the stone like so. When painting over permanent white gouache, be careful not to add too much water or go over one spot too many times. This will make the previous layers of paint run and blend together. When I say add water to the zinc white to make the paint a watercolor consistency, then paint a light wash over the stone. This is what I mean.